Welcome to your personalized news report, bringing you the key developments in Faroes politics and news.
And before we get started, just a reminder that for more in-depth news and analyses, you can check out the PalsFundamentals YouTube channel. You'll find even more videos like this one over there.
Right, so this news report is really about giving you a concise overview of recent Faroes events based on the sources we've looked at.
Exactly. And those sources are, as always, linked below for anyone who wants to explore them further. We're assuming a basic familiarity with the North Atlantic context, so we won't be explaining the absolute basics.
Okay, let's dive in. Where should we start? Maybe the economy.
Sounds good. Let's look at the latest figures from Hagstofan, that's Statistics Faroe Islands. This covers the period from March 2024 to February 2025.
And what are they showing?
Well, the big picture on imports is a pretty significant decrease in value. We're talking nearly 1 billion kroner less than the previous period.
Wow, 1 billion kroner. That's quite substantial. Any specific reasons for that drop?
Yeah, a few key things. There was less import of raw materials, specifically for fish processing,
Okay.
and also reduced imports of oil and, interestingly, vessels.
Vessels, so fewer ships being brought in.
Exactly. Looking at the specifics, fuel and other oils were down by about 231 million kroner. That's partly lower prices, but also lower volume.
Right.
And machinery, motors, ships, and vehicles combined dropped by roughly 487 million kroner. Ships themselves accounted for a huge chunk of that, about 364 million.
So that vessel point was a major factor.
Definitely. And vehicles were down about 114 million too. We also saw fewer imports coming from North America, particularly the USA, things like medicine, technical gear, vehicles.
Any shifts in where things are coming from?
Well, one notable thing is oil imports. It looks like there's been a shift away from the Netherlands, an EU country, towards Norway.
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned raw materials for fish processing earlier.
Yes, a big drop there too. Over 50,000 tons less import of fish and other fish products intended for processing here.
Okay, so that's the import side. What about exports? What did the Faroes sell abroad during this time?
Hagstofn's figures for the same period show a decrease in the total value of fish product exports. It's down 485 million kroner, which is about 4%.
So exports down overall as well.
Overall, yes. But it's not across the board. Exports of certain species actually increased. We saw rises for salmon, haddock, saithe, and mackerel.
Oh, okay. So there's some winners in there. What about salmon specifically? You hear a lot about that.
Right. Salmon's interesting. The export value went up by nearly 53 million kroner.
Despite the overall drop, how did that happen?
Well, the average price per kilo actually decreased from about 72 kroner down to 64.
So cheaper salmon, but more value.
Exactly, because the volume exported went up significantly, over 14%. And there seems to be a shift to less processed product, like fresh or frozen fillets, and more exports of unprocessed, sort of cheaper goods.
I see. So volume and product type made the difference there. Any other standouts in exports?
Yeah, two more. The category Other Uses, not for human consumption, which is mostly offal, saw a big jump. Up 128 million kroner, that's almost 33%.
Wow.
And mackerel. Mackerel exports really surged in value, up nearly 470 million kroner, or about 47%.
Huge increase. Was that volume or price?
Primarily price. The volume actually decreased slightly by about 1.5 thousand tons, but the price increase was strong enough to drive that value way up.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Politics and media, there's been some talk about how politicians are communicating these days.
Yes, Eirik Lindenskov, who's the editor of Socialuren, he's pointed out a trend or maybe a concern about politics moving more onto social media.
How so?
His point is that politicians seem quite willing to state their views in press releases or, directly on Facebook or other platforms. But then when traditional media outlets try to follow up, maybe ask some tougher questions.
You become hard to reach.
That seems to be the experience sometimes, yeah. They're often unavailable for further comment, and Lindenskov suggests this can make it look like they don't fully stand by their initial statements.
And what do media experts say about this?
Well, Ibjord Skalvmidjord, a media scholar, she echoes some of these concerns. She stresses the media's fundamental role, informing citizens and holding power accountable.
Watchdog role.
Precisely. And her worry is that if politicians control the narrative entirely on social media, presenting issues with their own angles, their own premises, and then they're unreachable for critical questioning.
Then the media can't really do its job properly.
That's the concern. It hinders the media's ability to ask those critical questions, to challenge assumptions. Midjord argues this is actually a problem for democracy itself.
Because citizens might not get the full story.
Exactly. They get the politicians' curated version, but maybe not the necessary context or scrutiny. So the media's duty isn't fully met.
Right, an important point. Let's move on to fisheries news. Some vessels landing catches abroad.
Yes, that's right. Several pelagic vessels, Vestmenningur, Guttuns, Ango, and Burita, are planning to land blackfish catches outside the Faroes.
Where are they heading?
Okay, so Ango is going to Killybegs in Ireland with about 1,600 tons. Guttuns is heading to Skagen in Denmark with a larger catch, 3,400 tons.
Okay.
Vestmenningur is also going to Denmark, to Thybaron, with 2,300 tons. And Burita is landing in Norway, Karmsund, with 1,900 tons.
And they'll just offload and head back out fishing.
That's the plan, yes. Return to fishing after landing.
Okay. Now, something else that's been debated is the fast-track system for work permits, right, for workers from outside the Nordic region.
Yes, that's become quite a topic. There have been suggestions, notably from electing member Eigen Samuelson and also Bererda Steg-Nielsen, the leader of the Union Party, to perhaps consider a time out for the system.
A pause. Why?
The main reason cited is the high number of foreign workers currently in the Faroes. It seems there's even some agreement, maybe, between the coalition and the opposition that some kind of action might be needed.
But not everyone agrees on pausing it, I take it. What about businesses who rely on this labor?
No, definitely not universal agreement. The Faroe Islands Employers Association Faroe Arbeidsgiverflag, their chairman, John Sigurdsson, has been quite clear. He says halting the fast-track system would be a really significant setback.
Because the need for labor is still strong.
Very strong, according to them. And there's some data to back up the economic contribution. An economist, Johnny A. Grotnum, who's actually the new chair of the Economic Council, did an analysis for the House of Industry.
What did that find?
It estimated that the roughly 2,000 foreign employees contributed something like 2 billion kroner to GDP in 2023.
2 billion, wow.
And it also suggested they improved public finances by maybe 200 to 300 million kroner back in 2022.
So a clear economic argument there from the business side.
Yes. Niels Winder, the CEO of the House of Industry, reinforces this. He says the business community fully supports integrating foreigners. He also put the numbers in perspective. He mentioned that about 7% of the Faroes workforce is foreign. That compares to, say, 13% in Denmark or even 23% in Iceland.
So lower than neighbors.
Relatively speaking, yes. And Winder also acknowledged that, looking ahead with the current birth rate, foreign labor is likely going to remain necessary.
So the Employers Association supports integration efforts, but not stopping the fast track.
That seems to be the position. They support most initiatives in the new integration law. They're willing to discuss requirements, screening, things like that. But they strongly oppose stopping the fast track system itself. They see it as crucial for business, the economy, and, public finances too.
Okay, a clear stance there. Let's turn to politics again, but more international relations. The Social Democrats have a notable guest speaker coming up.
They do. Kristrún Frostadóttir, who is the current Prime Minister of Iceland and also the leader of Iceland's Social Democratic Alliance Party, Samfylkingin.
Iceland's PM, right. When is she visiting?
She'll be a guest speaker at the Faroes Social Democratic Party's Jafnaðarflokkurin's National Convention. That's happening on May 10th.
And where's the convention being held?
In the new large hall at Jörnir in Tórshavn.
Okay. And Frostadóttir, she's relatively new to the top job in Iceland, isn't she?
Relatively, yes.
Oh.
She has a background in economics. She worked as an advisor in media, research, before jumping into politics. She was first elected to the Alþingi, the Icelandic parliament, in 2021, became party leader in 2022.
And then prime minister.
After the election last December, yes, her party became the largest, focusing on improving living conditions and tackling the housing crisis. She's actually the youngest prime minister in Iceland's history.
Interesting. And she leads a coalition government.
Yes, with the Reform Party and the People's Party.
Right. Okay, let's switch to energy now. Electricity production sounds like there was a record in the first quarter.
Another record, yes. Production in the first quarter of 2025 hit nearly 129 gigawatt hours. That's about 4% more than the same period last year.
Good news then. More power generated.
More power, yes. But there's a bit of a nuance. The share coming from sustainable sources actually decreased. It was 61% this first quarter.
Oh, what was it last year?
Last year, in the same period, it was nearly 71% green energy. So the proportion of oil-based power went up.
So higher production overall, but a lower percentage from renewables. Why the drop in green energy share?
Well, Harry Mortensen, he's the head of production at SEV, the energy company. He expressed some dissatisfaction with this. Basically, less energy was generated from all the renewable sources compared to last year.
Any specific reasons?
Hydropower was a key factor. Two hydro plants were apparently under repair. And there was frost in January, which also hindered hydro production.
Ah, okay. Weather and maintenance impacting hydro. What about wind?
Wind power production also saw a slight decrease. It went from just over 44 gigawatt last year to nearly 43 gigawatt this first quarter. So wind accounted for about 33% of the total, with hydro at 27%.
So both main renewables were down a bit.
Yeah, and production from biogas and solar was also lower compared to last year's Q1.
Was there any improvement within the quarter?
February actually looked better for green energy, nearly 72% sustainable that month. Hydro picked up, and wind power especially performed better.
And there was some issue with a wind farm recently, wasn't there? In Nishaga.
That's right. The Nishaga wind farm had various problems, including generator failures, but the report says it's been fully updated now. 4 turbines got new generators. 1 was repaired over in England. It apparently operated well throughout March.
Good to hear that's resolved. What about Suðuroy, the southern island? How was their energy mix?
Suðuroy also saw a decrease in its green energy share. It was nearly 55% of their total production in Q1 compared to 72% last year.
And was that also hydro-related?
Directly, yes. The hydropower plant in Botany was out of service for repairs. So the green energy they did produce came from wind and battery storage.
Okay, lots happening on the energy front. Let's move to crime and justice. There have been a few incidents reported recently.
Yes, unfortunately. Firstly, there was an incident during a protest in Tórshavn. A man is now accused of defacing an Israeli flag.
What were the circumstances?
It happened during a protest organized by a group called Solidarity with Palestine. They were demonstrating outside Finson, where the Faroe Islands Israel Friendship Association was holding a meeting.
Okay.
Reports mention there was verbal harassment directed at people attending the meeting, things like child murderers being shouted.
Right. And the flag incident.
Apparently, one protester took an Israeli flag. Later, that flag turned up draped on the statue of Rasmus Effersey nearby.
Defaced.
Yes, with inscriptions, "Fuck Israel," and also "Tak fyrir lán," which means "thanks for the loan."
And the person responsible has been identified.
Police say the person involved has been identified, yes. They will be charged with defacing the flag. Usually that might result in a fine.
But could there be other charges?
Possibly, depending on the details. Charges for theft or maybe even robbery, which is more serious and involves violence or threats, could potentially be considered. Further interrogations are planned.
Okay. What else is on the police blotter?
There was a report from an electronics store, also in Tórshavn. Someone apparently stole goods worth around 8,000 kroner without paying.
Do they know who it was?
Not yet. The store has good security camera footage, which the police have. They've circulated the images internally, but haven't identified the person so far.
What are the next steps there?
They'll be talking to witnesses and continuing efforts to identify the individual. Publicizing the images is a possibility down the line if needed.
And there was also a serious workplace accident.
Yes, sadly. It happened yesterday evening on board a farming boat near Futaklet. The report came in around 6:30 p.m.
Was someone injured?
Yes, the injured person was taken to the National Hospital. Sources indicate the accident was severe. Apparently, a man lost one of his legs.
Oh, that's terrible. Okay, moving on to education. There seems to be an ongoing discussion about young Faroese people studying abroad.
Yes, it's a recurring theme. Recently, a contribution by Turji Alakjuni, who works as a study guidance counselor at Cams Delure, really stirred things up.
What was his point?
He was questioning the narrative, perhaps, about a mass exodus of young people leaving to study abroad. He referenced statistics from Studny, that's the Student Grant and Loan Authority.
What did the Studny stats show?
He pointed to their figures on how many students actually return after studying abroad, linking to a specific report from September 2023. He explained Studny's methodology using travel grant applications and population register data.
Okay, so he's using Studny data, but there was a counter-argument.
Yes, KVF, the Faroes Broadcasting Corporation, responded. They cited newer data, this time from Statistic's Faroe Islands, suggesting there were actually 1,865 Faroe students in Denmark in the 2020-2023 school year.
1865. That sounds like a lot more than would typically get travel grants from Studny.
Exactly. It's more than double the number receiving travel grants. Alakjuni's response to KVF's figure was, well, it lacks detail. We don't know exactly who is included. Ages, types of education.
So the definitions might be different.
Potentially, yes. He notes this broader figure could include everything from vocational training, short courses, all the way up to PhDs. Even apprentices with placements in the Faroes but enrolled in Danish schools if they're registered as living abroad.
Which raises a question.
Right. Alok Juni asks, why would potentially hundreds of Faroese students in Denmark not apply for the travel grants they're entitled to? It's a bit of a puzzle.
So what's his conclusion based on the Studny data he trusts?
His reading of the Studny trend data is clear. More students are choosing higher education in the Faroe Islands rather than going abroad. He sees a consistent decrease in travel grant recipients for both Denmark and the Usiun scheme for other Nordic countries.
And he disagrees with KVF's interpretation.
He disagrees with drawing strong conclusions about a trend based on that single, potentially broader data point from Statistic's Faroe Islands. And he also takes issue with KVF referencing a separate 2024 report about 1/5 of each generation no longer living here, suggesting it might conflate issues.
That he acknowledges the topic is important.
Oh, yes. He agrees with KVF that it's a vital issue and appreciates the continued focus on it. Just disagrees on the interpretation of the current trend based on available data.
Okay, a complex picture with different data points.
Yeah.
Let's look at the Landsbanki, the central bank. Their annual report for 2024 is out.
Yes, it is. The report covers the usual areas: the Treasury's liquidity and debt, the Landsbanki's own activities, and its financial situation.
What are the Landsbanki's main roles again?
Well, it operates as a regular institution within the national budget. Its responsibilities include managing investments and loans for the Treasury, monitoring the financial sector.
Okay.
It also acts as the secretariat for both the Faroes Risk Council and the Economic Council, and it manages the labor market pension fund.
So quite a few hats. How did their finances look in 2024?
Their total budgeted revenue was 1.6 million kroner, while budgeted expenditure was 10.6 million, so a net budget of 9 million kroner.
And the actual figures?
Actual expenditure came in a bit higher, at 11.5 million kroner, compared to 10.1 million the year before. Most of that was salaries, which rose from 7.5 million to 8.5 million. Purchases of goods and services also increased slightly.
What about revenue? Was it close to the budget?
Actual revenue was significantly higher than budgeted 3.6 million kroner versus the expected 1.6 million. This came from managing the pension fund and assets of other public funds.
So higher spending, but also much higher revenue. What was the net result?
The net expenditure ended up being 7.9 million kroner, which is actually less than the 9 million kroner budgeted.
Okay, so they came in under budget on the net figure. Any news on their budget for this year, 2025?
Yes, it seems their budget has been cut by 800,000 kroner for 2025.
Okay, noted. Moving on, there are some questions being asked about public procurement, how the government buys goods and services.
That's right. Barar Lekjun, he's a member of parliament for the People's Party, has put some questions to the Minister of Finance, Ruth Vang.
What's the issue?
It's about adherence to the official guidelines on public procurement. There's a circular from 2019 that's supposed to ensure taxpayer money is used well and that there's good competition in the Faroes market.
And the concern is that these guidelines aren't always being followed.
That seems to be the core of it. Apparently, the Minister of Finance herself acknowledged back in February that the rules in the circular are, quote, not always followed.
So Alok is pursuing this.
Yes. He's emphasizing that state institutions really ought to prioritize using public money responsibly and prudently. He also noted that the number of tenders requested on the official procurement portal, keepsportal.fo, seems quite low given the number and size of government bodies.
He thinks there should be more public tendering happening.
That's the implication. He acknowledges the circular allows for exceptions and has threshold amounts, but stresses the principle is that all purchases should ideally be covered by these regulations to ensure fairness and value.
So what specific questions did he ask the minister?
He asked 4 main things. First, what are the country's experiences generally with public tendering? Second, why are the guidelines not always followed? Third, are there any consequences for institutions that don't follow them?
And the fourth.
Is there a plan to lower the threshold amounts for when tendering becomes mandatory? And if so, when might that happen?
Okay, waiting for answers on those. Now, there's also a social commentary piece, an opinion piece, also by Barar Lekjun, that touches on some recent events.
Yes, he wrote a piece reflecting on the situation of Jewish people in Europe and connecting it to that recent protest incident in Tórshavn involving the Israeli flag.
What is his main concern?
He expresses deep concern about what he sees as rising anti-Semitism in Europe. He specifically mentions the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," identifying it as anti-Semitic because, in his view, it calls for the elimination of Israel.
And he ties this to the Tórshavn incident.
He does. He expresses dismay at the reports from the Finnsum protest, the alleged child murderers, shouts at attendees, and particularly the theft and defacement of the Israeli flag, which was then placed on Rasmus Effersey's statue.
He sees that as a particularly low point.
Yes, he contrasts it with Effersey's own poem about welcoming winds from the west, suggesting this incident represents something quite different and unwelcome.
Does he see this as just an isolated Faroes event?
He worries it might be more than that. He talks about winds of change in Europe, not necessarily for the better, and fears that what happened in Tórshavn could reflect a broader trend where Jewish people feel increasingly unsafe, even in neighboring Nordic countries.
Does he give examples?
Yes. He mentions Denmark needing armed guards at synagogues and the Jewish Museum, canceling school days at the Jewish school, Norway, where Jews in Bergen reportedly felt unsafe celebrating Passover openly, Sweden, with threats against the Israeli Eurovision contestant, and an incident in Copenhagen where a woman carrying an Israeli flag was allegedly attacked.
And he contrasts this with
the freedom for pro-Palestine gatherings and the widespread visibility of Palestinian flags. He shares a personal anecdote about visiting the Berlin Wall remnants and seeing Palestinian flags everywhere in Germany, especially Berlin, while Israeli flags were scarce.
Does he connect this to other societal changes in Europe?
He does observe a decline in Christianity, citing church closures in Germany, alongside a rise in Islam, noting mosque increases in Denmark and Germany. He links this, along with large-scale immigration from Muslim countries, to what he perceives as a rise in hate crimes against Jews.
Are there any statistics mentioned?
He quotes Rabbi Menachem Margolin of the European Jewish Association, saying 40,000 Jews have left Europe recently due to anti-Semitism, warning that 2025 is critical. And he mentions a reported 2,000% increase in anti-Semitism since October 7th, 2023.
Wow, 2,000%.
He also cites the chief rabbi of Paris, Moshe Sabag, apparently advising young Jews to leave France for Israel or other safer countries.
Does he bring in any other commentators?
Briefly, yes. He mentions Richard Dawkins identifying as a cultural Christian and expressing a preference for Christianity over Islam, and also notes Ayaan Hirsi Ali's conversion to Christianity.
And what's his concluding thought?
He asserts that the West, including the Faroe Islands, has a deep Judeo-Christian heritage and argues for the importance of preserving this legacy.
Okay, a strong opinion piece there covering a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Finally, let's get the weather forecast. What can people expect?
All right, the forecast valid until midday Friday, April 18th. We're looking at fresh to strong northerly winds between 8 and 13 meters per second. These will turn northwesterly overnight and into Friday morning.
And conditions. Rain?
Expect overcast skies with occasional rain or showers. These are more likely in the north and could potentially turn to sleet in places later on.
Temperature.
Staying fairly steady between 2 and 6 degrees Celsius throughout the day and night.
Okay, that's the immediate outlook. What about the slightly longer view from the briefing?
Right. The briefing from Wednesday gives a bit more context. There was weak high pressure bringing calm, dry weather then, but a low pressure system over England is moving northeast, passing us and heading into the Norwegian Sea by Friday.
And after that?
Then it gets interesting. High pressure, quite strong, around 1030 hectopascals, builds over Iceland on Friday evening. This is expected to spread east over the weekend.
What does that mean for the Faroes?
It means cold, unstable air getting pushed first north and then east towards us.
So colder and unsettled for the weekend.
Looks that way. Let's break it down day by day from Thursday. Thursday morning starts with light westerly winds becoming variable in the afternoon. Some sunny spells, mostly dry, temps 3 to 7 degrees.
But changes in the evening.
Yes, winds increase from the north in the evening, becoming fresh to strong northerly overnight, 5 to 10 meters per second. Cloudy, still mostly dry, temps dropping to 2 to 5 Celsius.
Okay, then Thursday itself?
Thursday will be windy. Fresh to gale force northerly winds, 10 to 15 meters per second, turning northwesterly in the afternoon. Overcast with some sunny spells, but definitely showers, and these could turn to sleet later. Winds decrease a bit overnight, temps 1 to 6 degrees.
And Friday?
Friday sees fresh to strong northwesterly winds, 8 to 13 meters per second, but they turn easterly to northeasterly in the evening. Still overcast with showers and occasional rain, maybe sleet mixed in. Temperatures 3 to 6 degrees.
Then the weekend with that high pressure influencing things.
Right. Saturday, fresh to strong northeasterly winds, 8 to 13 meters, decreasing and becoming more easterly towards evening. Overcast with some sun, occasional showers, possibly sleet. Temps 3 to 7 Celsius.
Sunday.
Sunday, fresh to strong easterly winds 8 to 13 meters, cloudy with occasional showers, temps ranging from 2 to 8 degrees Celsius.
And looking ahead to Monday.
Monday looks similar. Fresh to strong winds somewhere between easterly and northeasterly, 8 to 13 meters, cloudy again, occasional showers, temps 2 to 7 degrees Celsius. So yeah, unsettled and cool seems to be the theme.
Okay, thanks for that detailed forecast. So that brings us to the end of this news report. We've covered quite a range of topics today, from economic shifts and political communication
To energy trends, labor debates, fisheries news, and unfortunately, some crime and a serious accident as well. Plus those ongoing discussions around education and public spending.
Indeed. This report aimed to give you that factual overview, just laying out the recent events and discussions based on the available sources.
And hopefully it gives you a sense of the current landscape in the Faroe Islands. You might even see connections between some of these different areas we've touched on.
Worth considering how these pieces fit together. And just one last reminder, for more in-depth discussions and analyses, do check out the PalsFundamentals YouTube channel.
That's right, and all the sources we mentioned today are linked below if you want to read them for yourself.
Thank you for joining us for this news report.
Thanks for listening.